There's a moment that tends to reveal more about a person's emotional maturity than almost any other single moment can. It isn't how someone behaves when things are going well. It's what happens in the 3 or 4 seconds immediately after something goes wrong. A partner says something hurtful, a plan falls through, criticism lands harder than expected. In that narrow window, before the conscious mind is fully caught up, something in a person either reacts or responds, and the difference between those two words turns out to explain a great deal about how a life and its relationships eventually unfold. Emotional maturity gets talked about constantly, usually in vague terms, being calm, being a good communicator, not overreacting. But psychologically, it's a far more specific and learnable skill set than that vague description suggests, built from distinct components that can each be identified, practiced, and strengthened individually. Today we're going to walk through 8 of those components, grounded in actual research rather than generic self-help language, and look at what each one actually requires, in practice, not just in theory. It's worth naming, before going further, why vague descriptions of emotional maturity tend to be so unhelpful in practice. Telling someone to simply be calmer or to communicate better describes an outcome without describing any of the actual mechanisms that produce it, which is a bit like telling someone to simply run faster without ever mentioning stride length, breathing, or training volume. The 8 components that follow aren't abstract virtues to aspire to. They're specific, trainable skills, each with its own research base and its own concrete practice, and treating them that way, as skills rather than as character traits you either have or don't, tends to make the entire project considerably more approachable than it initially sounds. The first component is what psychologists call affect labeling, the specific skill of accurately naming an emotion as it's happening, rather than simply being consumed by it. Research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman found that the act of putting a feeling into words measurably reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain region associated with threat response, essentially turning down the intensity of the emotional reaction itself. This isn't a metaphor. It's a documented neurological effect. Someone who can pause in a moment of anger and think, "I'm noticing I feel humiliated right now," has access to a genuinely different physiological experience than someone who simply feels the anger without naming it, even though the triggering event was identical. Emotionally immature responses tend to skip this step entirely, moving directly from feeling to reaction without the labeling process in between, which is part of why those reactions so often feel, afterward, like they happened almost automatically, with the person barely aware of choosing them. Building this skill starts small, simply practicing naming emotions accurately in low-stakes moments, noticing irritation instead of just acting irritated, so that the skill is already developed by the time a genuinely difficult moment arrives and actually needs it. The second component is distress tolerance, the capacity to remain functional while experiencing an uncomfortable emotion, rather than needing to immediately escape, suppress, or discharge it. This concept, developed extensively within dialectical behavior therapy by psychologist Marsha Linehan, distinguishes between emotions that are uncomfortable and emotions that are dangerous, a distinction emotionally immature responses often fail to make. A difficult conversation, an uncomfortable silence, a wave of sadness. None of these are actually dangerous, but a nervous system with low distress tolerance treats them as though they were, generating an urgent need to end the discomfort as quickly as possible, often through behavior that creates a larger problem than the original discomfort ever was. Building distress tolerance involves deliberately practicing staying present with mild discomfort rather than escaping it immediately, sitting with an awkward silence instead of filling it, letting a wave of sadness move through fully instead of reaching for distraction the instant it arrives. This isn't about suppressing the urge to escape discomfort. It's about widening the gap between feeling the urge and acting on it, until that gap becomes wide enough to make a genuine choice rather than an automatic one. The third component is what researchers sometimes call taking responsibility without collapsing into shame, a specific balance that turns out to be considerably harder than it sounds. Psychologist Brené Brown's research draws an important distinction here between guilt, which says I did something that didn't work, and shame, which says there's something wrong with who I am. Emotional maturity requires the ability to acknowledge a mistake honestly, without that acknowledgement spiraling into a broader indictment of your entire character. The fourth component is tolerating another person's negative emotion without needing to immediately fix it, minimize it, or take it personally. When someone close to you is upset, sad, or frustrated, there's often a strong pull to do something about it right away, to problem solve, to reassure, to explain why they shouldn't feel that way, or alternately, to become defensive, as though their difficult emotion were an accusation aimed at you. Genuine emotional maturity involves a different capacity, simply being present with someone else's discomfort without needing to immediately change it, which paradoxically tends to be far more helpful than any of the more common reflexive responses, because it communicates that their emotion is tolerable and doesn't need to be managed away for your comfort or theirs. The fifth component involves distinguishing between a boundary and a punishment, two things that can look nearly identical from the outside but come from entirely different internal places. A boundary is a clear statement of what you will and won't accept, communicated calmly and maintained regardless of the other person's reaction. A punishment is designed specifically to make someone feel bad, often as an indirect way of expressing hurt or anger that hasn't been named directly. Emotionally immature conflict often disguises punishment as boundary setting, the silent treatment framed as needing space, a passive-aggressive comment framed as simply being honest. Learning to notice the difference, in your own behavior specifically, whether an action is aimed at protecting something you genuinely need, or aimed at making someone else suffer for having hurt you, is one of the more uncomfortable but clarifying distinctions to practice honestly. The sixth component is delaying reaction long enough to respond deliberately rather than reflexively, sometimes called the pause, a concept that shows up across nearly every major framework for emotional regulation. This isn't about suppressing a reaction indefinitely. It's about creating even a small gap, a few seconds, a single breath, sometimes literally stepping out of a room, between the moment a trigger occurs and the moment a response gets chosen. Psychologically, this gap matters because the initial surge of a strong emotion, the first 10 to 20 seconds after a trigger, tends to be the period when judgment is most compromised and reactive behavior is most likely. Nearly all regrettable reaction people describe afterward, "I don't know what came over me. I wish I'd said that differently," happened inside that narrow window before the gap had a chance to open at all. The seventh component involves recognizing and interrupting projection, the tendency to attribute your own unprocessed feelings to someone else rather than owning them directly. This shows up constantly in close relationships, accusing a partner of being distant when you're actually the one who's been withdrawn, assuming someone is angry with you because you're carrying unexamined anger yourself. Emotional maturity requires a specific kind of internal honesty, pausing to ask, is this actually about them? Or is this feeling originating somewhere in me and simply landing on them? A question that's uncomfortable to ask sincerely, precisely because the answer is sometimes not what you prefer to hear. The eighth component, and in some ways the foundation the other seven rest on, is self-validation, the capacity to trust your own perception and worth without requiring constant external confirmation. Someone who lacks this tends to need every feeling immediately validated by someone else before it feels legitimate, checking, was I wrong to feel hurt by that, in a way that outsources emotional judgment entirely to whoever happens to be available to answer. Emotional maturity doesn't mean never seeking outside perspective, which remains genuinely valuable, but it does mean having a stable enough internal sense of your own experience that a differing outside opinion doesn't automatically overwrite what you know to be true about how something affected you. Consider a composite example. Someone will call Marcus, a manager who several years into his career received consistent feedback that he was difficult to bring problems to, not because he was unkind exactly, but because any piece of critical feedback from his own team triggered a visible defensiveness that made people reluctant to raise issues at all. Marcus genuinely wanted to improve and initially tried to simply suppress the defensive reaction, forcing a calm exterior while the same intensity churned underneath, which his team could sense regardless of how composed he appeared on the surface. What actually shifted things for Marcus wasn't suppression. It was working through several of these components directly and deliberately. It's worth adding a second example because emotional maturity develops differently depending on which components a person is already strong in and which remain underdeveloped. Consider someone we'll call Priya, who had no trouble at all with distress tolerance or affect labeling. She could sit calmly through difficult conversations and name her feelings with real precision. Where Priya consistently struggled was the eighth component, self-validation. Every disagreement with her partner, however minor, sent her searching for outside confirmation before she felt able to trust her own read of the situation. Texting friends detailed accounts of arguments, asking repeatedly whether she'd been wrong to feel a certain way, sometimes reversing her own position entirely based on whoever she'd consulted most recently. This created a specific, exhausting pattern in her relationship, not because Priya lacked insight or emotional awareness. She had plenty of both, but because she couldn't act on that awareness without first outsourcing the final judgment to someone else. Her partner began to feel like arguments never actually concluded between the two of them, since Priya's actual position seemed to depend more on her most recent conversation with a friend than on anything that had been discussed directly. What eventually helped wasn't developing more emotional insight, since she already had plenty. It was practicing a specific, uncomfortable discipline, sitting with her own read of a situation for at least 24 hours before seeking any outside opinion at all, giving her own perception enough space to solidify before it could be immediately outsourced and potentially overwritten. Priya's case illustrates something important that Marcus's story doesn't fully capture. Emotional maturity isn't a single skill that develops uniformly. It's a set of distinct components, and most people are considerably stronger in some than others, which means the specific work required looks different from person to person, even when the underlying goal, responding rather than reacting, remains the same.